here. You are an English major, and you would therefore should be the best person to write a report. But that might be an error. So sometimes I make that assumption and say, okay, in this class we have some communication specialists, so therefore they are pretty good at doing presentations and stuff like that. That might be an absolute mistake, because I'm giving power to somebody who doesn't necessarily have that power or has done nothing to indicate it, but I've given it to them because of the area of study that they're involved with. And sometimes we may do that unintentionally, and you know, we have to be aware of that fact that sometimes we run into that issue. All right, finite power. Um, Power is not finite, and indeed can be shared and amplified. So this starts to bring us into conflict with the concept that power a um, is a scarce resource, and that therefore power is something that ought not to be shared, and that sharing your power is seen as being indecisive or avoidance of your responsibilities. Now, that is not true. Power is something that can be shared, one, and stopping to make a decision and consulting with other people is not avoidance of your responsibility or indecisiveness. It can be, you know, if you do it too often, but it is a way in which you can arrive at a better decision if you bring into being the individuals who have the expertise or the reverent power that helps to make a better decision for the circumstance or the situation that you're talking to. That's going to be a very, very important element of leadership. That means you are giving power over to other people who may know more than you, may have experienced more than you, or may have a perception of the situation that is critical to the way in which you're making the decision. But the only way that you're going to do that is to release the control of power that you think you have, because honestly, we really don't have that much power. All right. Others abuse power that they shares with them, but legitimate rules. Right. So you might want to share your power with somebody, and you do so, but the person you share it with, you know, basically they say, yeah, power goes to their head kind of thing, and they start to take it out on people and figure they could tell people how to do this and that kind of stuff. Seen that happen a few times in classes, especially with immature students sometimes, um, where a teacher gives them some degree of authority over others, and they take it to the point of ridiculing others and being punitive in their behavior towards them. That's really a poor use of power. That actually is somebody who's not mature enough to take in that position of being powerful or having power being given to them. So that was a poor decision on the leader to give that person that type of power. So kind of important for us to look at that sometimes, because we can't make mistakes like that, and we have to kind of take it back. Um, so the idea here is that if we understand the sources of power and we understand that power is something can be shared, there's some elements that we have to look at in terms of we can't keep everything to ourselves. Now, that's something that I've experienced in Costat actually. During a period of time when there was change in leadership in the organization, that is, change in the president of the college from one period to the next, we had a situation where power was concentrated to one individual and everything had to run through that person. That slowed decision making down in an organization so much that it caused the organization to almost stop working, and it was really problematic because everything had to be passed through that one individual, and there's only so much one individual can do in a large organization, which is one of the reasons why we farm off power to other people and give them responsibilities, But at the end of the day, we have to remember, although you delegate responsibilities to other people, ultimately the responsibility is still yours. Because if they make a mistake, or they're late on doing what they're supposed to do, the person who gets the hit for it is the individual who ultimately has responsibility for it, which is yourself, if you're the CEO or the leader, passing it off to other people. But again, the problem is hoarding power is problematic, because some people would just keep all that power within themselves or their position only, and that negates the kind of open relational leadership program that we're talking about. So when we talk about your power and your power brokering in an organization, the relational leadership power dynamic is one that you are sharing your power, that you're using it to empower other people to make decisions. The reason for that is going to be that you have to be able to engage in other people to want to take charge of certain things, be part of the processes that they're going to be utilizing in terms of getting objectives accomplished in the organization. So here they start talking about self-empowerment. This is where you encourage people in the organization to begin to self-empower, which means they look upon what they're doing. As a leader, you are encouraging the self-empowerment through a number of activities. So for example, you educate your membership, sharing information, allowing for discovery and sharing knowledge. Leading, which means you're motivating these individuals to want to become more savvy to making decisions and so on, and taking charge of certain elements. Structuring, which is creating the climate and the organizational structure that allows for people to take charge, to change policies, to utilize the systems, to be able to um, empower themselves within the organization. You have to be able to provide the resources necessary to get their jobs done. So this is something that a lot of managers or leaders kind of feel in, because they say, okay, I'm giving over these responsibilities to you, I'm giving you responsibility for this, so and so, but the resources necessary to get it done is sometimes not given out, or is farmed out in such a way that you are basically saying, I'm giving you the power to do this, but I'm going to give you these resources very limited. So you're limiting the amount of empowerment that's taking place in the group or in the organization by limiting the amount of resources. This is particular where monetary resources is something that has to be passed along. Whereas you give them a budget and you say, okay, you have to work with that. You just, how much you need this week, and you pass it out that way. It's just that's kind of half-hearted type of thing. Of course, mentoring is another method, or one of the things that can be done in terms of working with people and mentoring them to be able to become self-empowered and to take charge of certain things, and of course actualizing it, which means the individuals concerned have to be able to step on it and work on it, and basically claim the power that has been offered to them. Not all members of the organization will value the empowerment. For some reason, whatever it is, some people are afraid of taking power because they see once they have the power, it 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 provides a place where they can get hurt. They feel as if I'm given this job to do, then when we make decisions about it, I can get punished for it. And you have to actually remember, go back, create the environment in which, although you're handing over power and some of your responsibility, you're not delegating so that if something goes wrong, that person takes the rap for it. And a lot of people do that, unfortunately. They farm out or delegate responsibilities. They don't follow through on the rest of the processes that are necessary to, fully empower the employees to be able to make those decisions. And then when things go wrong, they withdraw themselves as being responsible for the situation. And that actually speaks to the whole concept of delegation. You can delegate as a leader, but you have to remember, when you delegate, you don't delegate the responsibility. You delegate the activity, not responsibility. responsibility to maintain is yours. Now, there's a concept of mattering and marginalization here that is important, because when you feel empowered in an organization, you feel that the organization and its actions and vision and stuff is it matters to you, and therefore you're going to engage with the organization. But there's some people who never feel that degree of mattering, and that those people are at the margins of the organization. And that marginalization is something that we have to pay attention to, especially in a very large organization or small ones. You can have, because let's look at it from a family perspective. You have a family of maybe 5 or 6 people, and they're making decisions about what's going on. Like, let's say they're doing an extension in the house or something along that. They're doing something, and there are certain elements or people in the family with whom the discussion is being engaged. But because of your age, or maybe the pecking order in your organization, you are being left off of the decision-making process. You've been marginalized and pushed to the corners or the edges of the decision-making process. So in that family circle, you feel like what you say has no bearings on what everybody else is saying. You've been marginalized. And as a leader in an organization, it's important to make sure that every member of your organization, for the betterment of things, has to feel as if what they say and what they feel matters, or else you're going to encourage marginalization of people in the organization that can lead to further problems as you start to move on. This is critical um, with organizations, but it's also important even in families, because eventually, if you feel marginalized enough, you don't feel part of the family. What ends up happening is that they start to drift off. They do things on their own, and eventually they begin to, and I'm pretty certain you all are familiar with people in your own families who, they felt marginalized by their parents and stuff like that. They just drift off. You hardly see them. They don't come to family activities. When they do show up, like a totally different individual. You don't know them from Adam. Um, and they don't feel as if anything they say is important to anybody else, anything, and that creates a lot of problems um, in an organization. That type of feeling leads to anxiety, right? And they're not going to be committed to the organization at all, because they feel as if, I'm being ignored by this organization. Pretty much like how you'd feel in a family that marginalizes you because they don't value your input, because nobody's reaching out, nobody's trying to empower you to help make decisions. So again, as a leader, you need to be careful and try to make sure that everybody in the organization matters, and that they're not marginalized in the wider scheme of things. If you think about that from a society perspective, a lot of people feel marginalized by when decisions are made, because their point of view is not important, or is not seen as being important, because they are not in the view of it. This has to do especially with poverty and stuff like that. They feel marginalized by circumstances. Empowering environments, well, we spoke a lot about this. The organization has to create the environment in which it encourages people to want to become empowered. And the environment has to encourage that by making it a learning environment, by not punishing people to take on responsibilities, and to make risky decisions and take a chance. So you have to create that environment that's going to encourage people to want to get involved and not be afraid of doing things in the organization. So here you talk about eliminating fear of humiliation, operating on a sense of trust and inclusivity. Those kind of things are important for you to try to engage and create as a leader in the organization, and to make sure that the people feel as if whatever they try, they're going to be appreciated for doing it as part of the empowerment environment. Organizational dynamics is going to be something that has to be paid attention to. We could think about it from the concept of organizational culture. If the culture is one that disengages easily, then what you find, or the organizational culture doesn't value empowerment, then those are the kind of things you're fighting against. That culture of being apathetic is something that the public sector, for example, is something that they have to suffer with and deal with, but it's very difficult to engage with because of the amount of problems that they face in relation to those things. So empowerment and delegation. So as we talked about delegations from before, as a leader, you can empower people by giving them things to do, but they're not the same thing. And remember, whenever you delegate, you don't delegate the responsibility, you only delegate the activity. Remember that, huh? Um, and sometimes I like this quote here: native leaders retain a great deal of power or control when they're delegating. So you can't delegate piecemeal. You have to delegate and give all the resources and power that is necessary for them to act upon it. All right. Participants may feel manipulated, underprepared, or unprepared, resentful, or victimized. And that's something that I've seen happen in organizations and from particular leaders that I've experienced over time, where they hand over an activity, give you partial information, no resources, and then when it comes time to deliver and you deliver something that is not seen as being meeting standards, then they are held responsible for that when they knew upfront that there was insufficient information being passed on, insufficient resources being provided. And one of the biggest resources that in organizations that is withheld is time. Huh? People think of money, but time is also a resource, because in order to get certain things done, you need to give it time. But if the organization is unwilling to be flexible with how you use your time, then that is, as much as we could say, is not giving you the tools necessary to be able to do what you have to do in order to perform. Um, we speak to that sometimes here in Costat because we're given responsibilities to do certain things. And when we ask for, okay, so can I get a one class reduction for the semester so that I'll have the time to be able to work on this project? No, 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 you can't get that. You have to teach your full load. And in fact, if we want you to teach an extra class on top of that, and those are the kind of things where you get delegated as having to act in a particular thing, but then when um, you can't deliver because you don't have the resources, then everybody looks upon you as, hey, we gave you this to do and you already disappointed us, and this will go on your record or kind of, and that's the kind of environment you want to avoid trying to create. You want to create empowering environments by being honest and straightforward about what you're doing. If you can't give me the time, you had to give me something to be able to do this. So maybe if I can't get time, I can get assistance, manpower that will help to, you know, get the limited time that we have left over, sharing up the activities moving forward. Those are the kind of things that you have to look at. All right. All right. So sharing responsibility, sharing power is going to be important. That's what empowerment is all about. Sharing power. Now, the next element we want to talk about is the relational leadership model speaks about ethical and moral leadership. And there are two chapters that you're going to be looking at this with a lot more detail than I can do here. So ethics and moral values is defined here as let's look at what we have here. Ethics is the social rules that govern and limit our conduct, especially the ultimate rules of concerning right and wrong. There's another definition here. Of course, they speak about the origin of the word from ethos, Greek word of character, sentiment of the community. So you start to see the connection here with ethics has to do with what the community or the society that we operate in determines as what is good for us. What is the standard of behavior that should govern our principles that should govern our standards of behavior and so on. So You have another definition. For the purpose of this model, we look at ethics as being defined as the rules of standards or standards that govern our behavior. So some of you all are working in different environments or different skill levels. I think we have some radiographers here. We have some management people. We have environmental people. Everybody operates in a profession in which you could probably find a code of ethics or code of conduct which defines behaviors. So all of those things that may be documented or not speak to rules and standards and principles that govern behavior. All right. And that's going to be something important that is going to be critical in this relational leadership model, because the idea is that, remember, in the very definition, they speak about relational leadership being as ethical relationships, all right, guided by our shared ethical values. Now, that's going to be a little problematic, as we could see, because ethical values are not necessarily easily shared between people, because ethics and values and morals change over time, and those changes can be disruptive in terms of how we're going. All right. I mean, though they're speaking here, principles like values, ethics, standards, and morals provide true north directions to our lives when navigating our environments. I like the terminology that's used here. Professions, like I was just talking about, often use codes of ethics or standards that serves as normative expectations for people in a particular profession. So we have accounting um, code of ethics, although probably somebody might want to say, is there ethics and code? Well, speaking of which, there's supposed to be a lecture on the 23rd about business ethics. Anybody from this class attending or interested in attending? It's a live session. It's not an online. I think I posted the information in the classroom on the WhatsApp chat. So on the 23rd, Wednesday, 10 o'clock, I believe it is, on Wednesday in there it is, Wednesday, March 22nd on campus. Anybody you all could go and take it and see what they have to say about ethics in the business environment. That's what we're talking about in terms of developing ethical values and so on. See what they have to say about that in terms of ethics and business and how they correlate. We think more from the idea that ethics governs everything. So every aspect of our lives, there are ethical values and principles that govern what we do. And they all come from the same society that we work in, because they don't stand alone by themselves, but we have values that is expected of us, or behaviors that is expected of us, regardless of what job we find ourselves performing in, a profession we get ourselves involved with. We are expected to behave in what society expects us to do. But as I said, ethics and values is something that changes over time. And here comes up the issue of right and wrong. We're going to spend some time evaluating right and wrong and the way in which we go about dealing with that. Because, as I said, moral values are going to be influenced by a lot of things. Religion is one that we're going to be looking at. Personal belief structures is another one. But society generally has ideas, and our laws, for example, will reflect those kind of things. So the model that we're looking at is a ethical, values-driven model. So we are going to be using that concept of what society looks at as being important to us, that guides the behaviors of leaders. And it has to be that you are, as a leader, driven in all aspects of your behavior, in all your areas of influence and activities to behave in that particular manner. And that's because the expectation is going to be that we behave in that way in all walks of life. Where I work, where I live, the community I engage in, the relationships that I have with everybody. We basically have the same value structures that work across all of them. So that's a problem for a lot of leaders in our current circumstances, because we may practice one thing in the public eye but do something else in the private, and we want a distinction. My private life is separate from my public life, and truly what this model is saying is that you can't have that disconnect between looking at something that is wrong in one so you have this one value that you say is wrong in one environment but acceptable in another environment. That leads to what we call cognitive dissonance, and it creates problems, especially with followers, if they see you saying one thing in one environment but doing another in another environment. That is kind of disconnection that causes us to distrust leaders, especially when we see them behaving in a particular manner privately as opposed to what they espouse publicly. It's kind of like walk the walk and walk the talk kind of thing situation. So these are things that the model holds to be serious, um, important elements of designing the whole model of ethical leadership. All right, so they go through a lot here about where our values come from, and whether or not our values are freely we choose our values, or if our values are imposed upon us. Um, Interesting. And of course, we have a situation where you're dealing with an environment in which you have a society where there may be variations in values. And we spoke about that too, because part of the model also speaks to us being inclusive of people who have varying views of the world around us. And that simply means that for some people, particular belief structures that may be important to you may be different for that individual. Not that they don't care about it, but they perceive their behaviors differently in a different environment. So um, that's something that again you have to be dealing with. So here they're talking about things like being upright, honest, ethical in your dealing, being fair, um, being governed by the law and that type of stuff. Those are the kind of situations that they talk about. But the problem that we're going to come across a lot is where we have ethical arguments between what one set of people believe is right as opposed to another set of people um, seeing it as being wrong. So, like, for example, the debate going on in different parts of the United States about abortion. Some states are outright banning abortion since they had the change in Roe versus Wade at the Supreme Court. And that has been leading to ongoing struggles with women's rights and access to having abortions, especially if they want to terminate a pregnancy because they don't feel they're ready for children at that point in time, and criminalizing the activity so that even if you were to leave one part of the country and go to another part of the country to have an abortion, if you ever go back, you can be subsequently charged for homicide because you committed, um, um, well, according to the law in one part of the country, you committed murder in another part of the country. And that leads for a serious debate on what's going on in the American society there. And of course, it kind of impacts upon the rest of the world because, again, where they lead, others follow kind of situation. But it leads to a very interesting argument that's taking place. Um, and you can see that as part of the moral struggles that we face as a society. Where do we, I mean, one of the big things that we faced recently was when we had the gay rights activists, the LGBT thing. I don't know if any of you all were privy of that or paid attention to it, but we did have a change in some of our laws that impacted directly upon people from the LGBT communities, and they marched in support or in some issues in terms of the changes that were coming, um, and those kind of challenges face us as a society, and how we treat with it in terms of obvious conflict that comes up, how we go about treating with the conflict that comes up is going to be indicative of the level of dialogue that we're able to engage in. That because you simply don't agree with somebody else's position, it doesn't mean you don't have commonality between people. Um, but obviously, sometimes we have a situation where differences of opinion when it comes to some ethical value or moral value creates massive problems in terms of how we work with each other. And that is what this model is talking about too. That although we hold high ethical values and standards, we have to be open to the differences that obviously exist within societies about how they view certain aspects of behavior. And this is going to be the biggest challenge that you're probably going to look at in terms of the ethical value structure, because how we arrive at acceptable ethical values and standards is what is going to be a very important element, because the process of ideas becoming ethical or becoming accepted as an ethical standard is part of the conversation that we have to engage in our understanding of this leadership model. Because although it says that the relational leadership model is ethical, that brings with it a whole other set of questions and concerns and approaches that we need to be looking at. But in essence, what the model is saying is that whatever the agreed upon standards are, then everybody has to act within that. And we have to act within those standards all the time and in all walks of life. That's going to be a really important element. So I'll leave ethics and morals at this point in time until you all begin that discussion when I think that's chapter 6 comes up in the presentation. Um, but understand that it's going to have, yes, here we have 2 chapters on it. We have Thomas and McBurney dealing with integrity and moral purpose. And then the next week we have Brown and Morrison dealing with courage and moral leadership from the DAF. That's the other textbook. So there are 2 chapters that treat with it. And we have one of our activities is going to be attached to that particular thing as well. So we'll see one of your midterm questions is going to be in relation to that. All right, so morals and values, that's a huge thing that governs the activities of this or the nature of this rational leadership. It's really the backbone of it, because in a lot of instances, if you think about leadership and leadership issues that we face, it really sits around ethical values and moral behavior. Um, it's something that time and time again, leaders are looked upon as being, their behaviors make us question their ethical values, and that then makes us question their leadership capacity. And that really is where we kind of stand, because we've seen behaviors from leaders currently and in the past where it looks upon, we look upon them as being, how can somebody do what they did? How can they say what they said? If you're being considerate of other people, and that's the kind of engagement that we expect that our leadership will. Now, I mean, I know. All right, so let's take a practical example of the prime minister winding up on a young girl in a party on the road for carnival. Now, a lot of people looked at that and said that that was unethical behavior. But let's put it in the context of Trinidad. Isn't that our form of dance and um, culture of enjoyment during carnival time? Yes, no, or is it just that that's good enough for the everybody else in life, but not for people in leadership? That is a congruent issue that we talk about there. It can't be that ethically we look upon it from one aspect as being bad, and then in another context the same action is viewed as being enjoyment, and that's our culture. So it has to be consistent. You know, what I think was happening there is that people were utilizing what they captured on YouTube as something that they wanted to make people question the morality of one individual because they were dancing in a suggestive manner with another person. And I think that was just like a cheap shot, so to speak. I don't know how you all feel about it, and I'd be curious to find out what your responses were to that, given that we just came out of Carnival a little while ago. Anybody willing to take a poke? No? All right. So, leading by example. And this is where once you have your principles in place and that kind of stuff, you then lead by example. So it means that what you do and how you behave and how you deal with certain circumstances indicate who you are, what you stand for, and how your leadership is going to work. Now, too many times we have that situation where we try the whole thing, do as I say, not as I do. But the fact is that as the human animal, we learn more from doing than from any other medium. All right. Um, we remember 10% of what we read, but we will remember and recall more than 80% of what we do. That's an interesting thing. When it comes to learning, we've looked at that. At the end of the day, when you finish this course, after the 15 weeks of all this information, you'll only recall roughly about 10% of what we read through and what we spoke about. But whatever you did in the class, the chapter that you presented, the debate that you took place in, you'll remember more than 80% of that when you move on in life. And that's true, because we learn more from what we do than what we just absorb through reading or observation. Interesting, isn't it? That's why leading by example is going to be a critical element in the leadership model, because what you do stands for much more than what you've said to people and what you write and put out as publication stuff. What you do is going to be really critical. All right. So here's what they're talking about here. You have to model and lead by example. So whatever they're talking about here, in terms of it, it's always going to be about what you do will speak volumes over what you say. All right, like this quotation here from Waldo Emerson: "What you do speaks so loudly that I cannot hear what you say," implies an even greater emphasis on the importance of values and being congruent with your actions. What you do speaks so loudly, I can't hear what you say. It sounds funny, but if you think about it, if you say one thing but you do something else, then I really is what you're doing is what I'm paying attention to. It speaks more to me than what you say, because what you say is fleeting at the moment. All right. So again, the concept here is that the model is going to say to us and speak to the fact that we have to be careful that what we do is what we say. So there has to be a correlation between what we're doing and what we're saying, because we can try and practice what they talk about here, self deception. But the reality is that what whatever we really think and hold in our head is the way in which we will behave. So there is going to be that, because your body language will speak volumes beyond your spoken word, because we will know from a cognitive point of view we want to say the right things, but we don't necessarily always behave in that manner. And that's something that you want to be paying attention to, because there will be that disconnect between the two. All right. Um, Look at this one here. Most leaders begin with the goal of wanting to do the right thing, but some leaders get derailed by peer pressure or the temptation to trade leading for the common good with leading for personal gain. That's where you come into situations where you find yourself in leadership positions, or you arrive in a leadership position, and other people around you are encouraging or convincing you to do things from a different perspective. And I've seen a lot of leaders get negatively affected by this, because they come in there and they offer you all types of things to look the other way, especially even if in a position of doling out resources and stuff like that, and offering you bribes and all that type of stuff. That's where this type of action comes from. So leading by example is not an easy thing. And some people have been killed and removed from office as a result of trying to lead by example, um, and trying to walk that straight and narrow path that they speak about. I mean, it's difficult, because other people want you to, hey, we's friends, we could let me get around this kind of thing and give them that type of thing. You see that with police in particular. They face this type of thing a lot. They have their own peer pressure within the organization to not do the right thing. And there's also pressure from outside of the organization for people who would say, don't do the right thing, I'll give you this. And that type of encouragement for, personal gain and selfishness. And a lot of leaders succumb to that, unfortunately. Or some people are simply put in a position where some past action in their past, or some current activity that they engaged in, puts them in a position where they end up getting compromised, and they get blackmailed into behaving a particular way. So you have a whole host of different. You see that coming up in movies a lot, but the reality is that it actually faces us um, in everyday life. It's just that it's not something that is broadcasted, um, around, but people get put in these kind of positions on an everyday basis, especially those in positions of sensitive leadership positions. They get put into some tricky situations, and they are asked to do things that they don't necessarily feel sits well with their their concept of ethical values and standards. And that actually leads to cognitive dissonance that will tend to create a lot of problems for the individuals, and eventually sometimes people walk away from leadership positions because of that circumstance that they experience, because they've been through the exercise and they're getting themselves influenced in that particular manner. All right, let me try and pull through this quickly. We leading by example. The process element that we talked about is that everything we talked about has to be couched in a process type of thing, because again, at the end of the day, why things need to be in a process situation or dealt with from a process thing is that we want to be able to repeat the the um, the activity time and time again and get the same outcomes. So you want things in a particular process so that one, it's easy to work through the system and to work through the process and understand how it works. And it it is going to be something that you run through time and time again, and you get the same goals, or you get the goals that you're looking for to come up. That is really what the whole process orientation is really going to be. Because every time you do something over and over, you get better at doing it. And it can't be a hit or miss. It has to be something that you know you're doing this, and then you follow with this, and so on and so on. It is that process that you want to do and mean when you're doing it, so that you end up with the outcomes that you're looking for. So process is going to be important, that you're always going through the process of, we spoke about reflection, coming back and making concrete decisions, changing that decision based upon the actions and outcomes, and then circling backwards and forwards. Process is at the root of all of that. All right. And of course it's held together. If we remember the diagram that we looked at, it's held together by the ethical values that give it the grounding that we're looking at from the thing. If I can find that further up in the thing, I should have brought a copy of that down. That's this. So remember the ethical values, all of this, the process surrounds everything. Everything is process oriented as we move forward. I think I was at 90 something. Where am I? Right, so we're dealing with process. Okay. Again, so you design your process and you try to include all the elements that you want: ethical elements, inclusive elements, empowering elements. You try to make sure that those things are continuously flowing, and you're able to repeat the exercises over and over again, and start to develop the same type of leadership activities and so on, so that you could get the same kind of outcomes or improve the outcomes from one stage to the next. So processes is going to be important. Some key elements that they talk about here includes collaboration, reflection, feedback, civil confrontation, that's important, community building, and a level of profound understanding called meaning making. So what in the process it becomes meaningful, so that you're not just doing things for doing its sake, but you're doing it in order to make meaning out of the things that you're getting involved with. So that process of rolling through collaboration, reflection, feedback, civil. Now that's an interesting phrase, civil confrontation. That is where you deal with the conflict that generally arises as we deal with other people. But we are confronting them, but in a civil manner. And they're confronting us as well, because obviously there are things we may need to change. That helps to develop the community, and that then leads to everybody appreciating, right, we're making meaning out of this. It means, this organization means something to me. I'm part of it, and we're making positive changes moving forward. So that is elements of the process relation. All right. So again, it's all about the process of rolling through and coming back around, that type of stuff. So we spoke about it this way. All right. I think we more or less. All right. Some other things I talked about: collaboration and cooperation. That's part of the process, because we have to work together. We have to be able to deal with it in such a way that we collectively come to decisions, because we remember we are being collectively smarter. We are not just being individually smarter, but we are collectively smarter. And when we work with cooperation with other people, we learn more, we broaden our perspectives, we start understanding from other positions and other points of views. That broadens our perspectives, that makes us understand more. And that's important for us to be able to cooperate with each other, because it strengthens the decision. It appeals to more individuals, because we are including and being inclusive of other point of views for the situation that we're looking at. So that process involves cooperation and collaboration, right? So we're not just competing with each other, we are actually working with each other to find better solutions that they're talking about here. So we talked about that all the way through here. And we are at meaning making. We spoke about this. any organization that you get involved with, if it doesn't mean anything for you, you're not going to commit to it. At the end of the day, that's what making meaning is. If you get involved in an organization and at the end of the day it doesn't mean or matter much to you, you're not going to engage in it. You're not going to spend time working in it. You can't definitely, you're definitely not going to even get involved from a leadership position in it. All right. So meaning has both cognitive and emotional. So it's both meaningful in terms of how what you think about it, as well as how you feel about it. That's the emotional aspect. So it means something to you, and you have an emotional investment in it. So it matters to you from those two perspectives. It matters to you from your logic section, cognitive section, and it matters to you from your heart. So we talked about this from your head and your heart, and that will then impact upon your practice. So we kind of come back to that head, heart, and practice model that we talked about. Again, process. So the process is one that helps you to maintain and develop these ideas and thoughts, and moving forward, generating meaning. I think this here, data, information, knowledge, understanding, wisdom, thoughts, and action. So again, kind of cycle. Thoughts and actions, which is reflection, and move back into data input, information, process. Um, the that whole process of making meaning as that type of thing moving forward. So if I'm rushing through these, you can always download it and look back at them. But look at the chapter and speak about it, because at the end of the day, the process is one that kind of focuses attention on how you go about doing what you have to do, and the making meaning out of it is really important for us to kind of get the ideas that we're looking at here. All right, so I think we are at the, well, last part of the process is reflection and contemplation. So as part of the overall process, reflection and contemplation becomes a very critical part of the making meaning process, or the whole process itself. Um, we need to be doing this on a more regular basis, doing reflections and contemplation. It's a kind of important for us to be doing that, because it helps us to take stock, make changes, and make improvements. Try something, it doesn't work, reflect on it. How do I adjust that? What do I do? Do those things and make those changes moving forward. That is generally going to be one of the best processes to utilize, and then work on trying to make it better. Um, and you can also reflect collectively too. I don't know if you've ever done something called a post-mortem session with any type of activities that you did. Let's say you engage in some major activity, and after the activity is finished, you do a post-mortem, because you want to reflect on what happened, what went right, what went wrong, and how we can make things working better. Because the freshness of the event is usually going to lend itself to seeing pitfalls and problems that you encountered that you didn't see before, but after doing it, you're going to have to, look forward to the next time around getting it done right. That makes sense? All right. So now kind of like, I think that brings us more or less to the end of the chapter. Right. That was the last key thing. Right. Right. So summaries here. So with this model that you're looking at here, is asking you to acquire a fair number of skills, and using these principles, we're hoping that you could reframe those skills in light of the model that we're looking at here. So we are going to examine more elements of the model in more detail as the other chapters are presented. And we're looking at you developing your overall leadership skills in such a way that you can bring to bear the relational leadership. Now, if you don't agree with this approach, then you need to suggest something that from the models that we looked at from before. Again, I'm not going to focus on you memorizing this stuff, but really just kind of coming to grips with it and treating with it across the board. All right. So, as I said here, the relational leadership model was presented in great detail. I tried to, get the key ideas out of it, review them, look at them, and see what's applicable to you and how you feel about this whole leadership process that they're looking at in terms of what this model is all about. Okay, all right. I know you're probably tired because it's 10 past the hour that we should have stopped. So I will ask whether or not you all are okay and you have any questions you want to ask at this point. All right, no questions. I'll stop the recording.